Morning again, everyone. Like I said, today we're going to be looking at wages and salaries. And I always tell students this is a very important topic because very soon you're going to be leaving school. Some of you will go to college, but some of you will get jobs. And you need to know how your salary, how your wage is going to be calculated. And so, even though, yes, this is important for the BGCSE, it's also a very important life skill to know how your wages and salaries are calculated. So, let's look at a scenario. We have Susan. Susan asked her parents, Mary and Whit, whether they were paid a wage or a salary. And together they said that they get a paycheck, not a wage nor a salary. Susan then proceeded to tell her parents about wages and salaries because you know what's interesting? Many people don't know that there's a difference between a wage and a salary. And so today we're going to briefly look at that before we move on. So at the end of this lesson, you will be able to solve consumer math problems involving wages and salaries. Definitions. So like I said, there is a difference between wage and salary. So let's look briefly at the difference. Here's what a wage is. A wage is typically paid on a daily or weekly basis, and it's paid to a manual or unskilled worker. And these persons are either paid an hourly rate or a piece rate. So when you see persons saying $11 an hour, $12 an hour, that refers to a wage. Now, salary, your salary is going to be paid on a monthly or bi-weekly basis, and it's often expressed as an annual sum. So when persons say make $33,000 a year, that's a salary. That's their salary. And it's especially for those professional and white-collar workers. Now, some other terms that you need to keep in mind that come up quite frequently when we're dealing with exam questions as well as real life. Gross pay is going to be the total amount of money that an employer pays to an employee. So let's say I start a job and my employer says that they will pay me $300 per week. That's my gross pay. That's the total amount of money I make each week. But then I also have to consider something called net pay. And the net pay is going to be the total amount of money that the employer receives after all required and voluntary deductions are made. So even though my employee says that he's going to pay me $300 or $350 a week, that's not necessarily how much money I take home because deductions will have to come out of my salary. In the Bahamas, we pay national insurance. Every person that works is to pay national insurance, which is a deduction that comes out of our salary each time we get paid, out of our paycheck each time we get paid. So look out for those two terms because you're going to have to be familiar in working with them, gross pay and net pay. Please make sure your mics are muted. All right, another thing you need to look out for is overtime. This is going to be any time worked beyond one's scheduled working hours. So let's say you normally work 40 hours. If in a particular week, for whatever reason, you work 45, those additional 5 hours are considered overtime. And it's usually paid at a higher rate. So sometimes they'll throw terms at you like time and a half, double time, or triple time. That's telling you that you're going to get paid even more for your overtime hours worked. Time and a half means that you're going to take your regular pay rate and multiply it by 1.5. Double time means to multiply your regular pay rate by 2, and then triple time means to multiply it by 3. Finally, deduction. This is the act or process of subtracting a sum of money. So like I talked about, national insurance is considered a deduction because they take that money out of your pay, but there are also other deductions. Last class, we talked about hire purchase. Some companies offer a salary deduction where they take out a certain amount of money from your pay each month. That's also considered a deduction. These are some key terms I need you to write down, especially if you're not familiar with wages and salaries or if your regular teacher hasn't done it as yet. I'll go a bit slower so that you have time to write. Basic wage is going to be the basic rate multiplied by the basic number of hours. Overtime hours is going to be the number of hours worked. Take away the basic number of hours. Overtime rate is going to be the basic rate times the time. Overtime pay is going to be overtime rate multiplied by the overtime hours worked. Gross pay is overtime pay plus the basic wage. Sorry. Okay, so I'll give you a few seconds to write that. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A section so that others may benefit from your questions. I'm giving you a few more seconds to get the question down and then we'll move on. Not the question, but to get these points. I see something in the Q&A, so let me just look at that quickly before I move on. Yes, Miss Cash, I'm giving you time to write. Oh, you meant the definitions prior, maybe. Here's what's going to happen. As soon as this lesson is done, it's going to be uploaded to the original virtual school portal. And so you can go back there, get the PowerPoint, and get all of the definitions if you find that I'm moving too fast. Alrighty, let's move on to our first question. And all of these things I need you to keep in mind as we go through the first question. So that's why it was very important for you to write them. The example says, last week, Kenzie works 8 hours each day, Monday to Friday, together with 6 hours on Saturday and 4 hours on Sunday. Hours worked on the weekend are paid at time and a half. She is paid $6.50 per hour, normally from Monday to Friday. Calculate A, her basic wage, B, her overtime wage, and C, gross pay for the week. So before I proceed to answer the question, what I'll do, I'll give you a few seconds to quickly jot down the important points from this question. And remember, as I work through the question, it will be displayed at the very top of the screen, so you still have more time to write. So about 20 more seconds, and then we'll move on to work through the question. Please have on hand a scientific calculator as well as some writing utensil and some paper. All righty, let's go. Let's calculate her basic wage. And again, I'm just going to identify for myself what part of the question relates to her basic wage. They tell me that she works 8 hours each day, Monday to Friday. That's important for me to know. Also, with regards to her basic wage, they tell me that she's paid $6.50 per hour from Monday to Friday. So we're going to take those pieces of information and calculate her basic wage. First of all, I need to know how many hours in total she worked from Monday to Friday. Hours worked is equal to, well, if she worked 8 hours per day and Monday to Friday is 5 days, I can multiply 8 times 5, which tells me that she worked 40 hours. So for this week, she worked 40 hours in total. Then the question went on to say that she is paid $6.50 per hour, right? So for those 40 hours, each of those 40 hours, she's going to get paid $6.50 per hour. So her basic wage is equal to $6.50 times 40. When we calculate that, the answer for A, her basic wage, is going to be $260. So I see Ms. Morris provided an answer. Go ahead and check your working. If you didn't get that, please make corrections. I'll leave it up on the screen for another 30 seconds before moving on. All right, let's move on to the next part of the question. I'm just going to move this to the side. We won't necessarily use that now. And what I'll put on it is, I'll label it A. won't work. So let's move on. Now they say calculate, excuse me, her overtime wage. I need to identify again what part of the question speaks to the overtime wage. Let me change my color. Right here, they tell me hours worked on the weekend are paid at time and a half. They also tell me that she works 6 hours on Saturday, which is definitely the weekend, and then another 4 hours on Sunday. So those two sentences give me all that I need to answer or calculate her overtime wage. I'm going to label this question B for when I need it at a later time. So let's start by determining her overtime rate. Overtime rate is how much she is paid for each hour of overtime. They tell me that it is paid at time and a half. And so to calculate the overtime rate, I'm going to take her regular pay, which is $6.50, and multiply it by 1.5. And I'm switching between the start. I'm going to go back to the X for the multiplication sign. So her overtime rate, when I multiply those two together, I find that she is paid $9.75 per hour of overtime. So every time she works, or every hour she works overtime, she's going to get paid $9.75 instead of the $6.50. Now I need to calculate her overtime hours. I need to find out how many hours of overtime she works. And the question tells me she worked 6 hours on Saturday plus 4 hours on Sunday. So in total, she would have worked 10 hours. So I have everything I need to now calculate her overtime wage. I know her overtime rate, which was $9.75, and I know she worked for 10 hours. So to find her overtime wage, I'm going to multiply the two. So I'm going to multiply $9.75 times 10. When I multiply the two, I find that for those 10 hours, she earned a total of $97.50. I'll give you some time to take that down. In the meantime, I noticed a question in the Q&A section, so I'll address that. Yes, Mr. Hepburn, correct answer is $97.50. That's her total overtime wage. So that's how much money she's going to make from working overtime. All right, take advantage of the next 30 seconds to get the question down, and then we'll move on to part C. Alrighty, let's now move on to part C. Part C in all of this says to calculate her gross pay for the week. Well, we already discussed our definitions. We know that gross pay is going to be the total amount of money earned for the week. And so to calculate her gross pay, I'm going to add together her basic wage, so the amount of money she was paid for those 40 hours, together with the amount of money she was paid for that additional 10 hours of overtime. So gross pay equals $260 plus $97.50. And this is going to give me her total gross pay for the week. In total, Kenzie would have earned $357.50. Again, use this time, please, to take down the working and the answer. Make corrections if you didn't get it correct. And for our next question, we are going to increase the intensity, right? I see 4 questions in the chat. Let me see if I can address those. So thankfully, Mr. Tinker is adding all of the working and the answers to the chat. So in case you missed a part of my slide, you can find all of them there. But also keep in mind, like I said, after this lesson, everything is going to be uploaded to the virtual school's website. It might not be today, it might be towards the end of the week, but you will have access to my PowerPoint so that you can work through everything. Now we're going to move on to another example. And like I said, it's going to increase in intensity. So let's look at a question that's slightly different, but still refers to wages and salaries. Take this time to write down what you think is important. They say to me, at a Coca-Cola factory, the basic week is 36 hours. During a particular week, Mr. Roberts earned a gross wage of $360, but $90 was overtime earnings. Overtime is paid at time and a half. Calculate A, Mr. Roberts' pay before overtime earnings were added. B, Mr. Roberts' basic pay rate of pay. C, Mr. Roberts' overtime rate. And D, the number of hours Mr. Roberts worked. So take down what you think is important from this question. I'll give you a second to do that, and then we'll get started. So I'm giving you a little bit more time. Get down what you think is important. And then we're going to go through the question. All right, just to review what the question says. At a Coca-Cola factory, the basic week is 36 hours. During a particular week, Mr. Roberts earned a gross pay of $360, but $90 was overtime earnings. Overtime is paid at time and a half. Calculate A, Mr. Roberts' pay before overtime earnings. Well, let's look at what part of the question speaks to that. They tell me that his gross wage is $360 and overtime earnings is $90. So we're going to use those two pieces of information to calculate how much he made before overtime. And if I take away his overtime earnings, what's going to be left is his regular pay, how much he made before overtime. So I'm going to subtract 360, take away, let me put basic. His basic wage is equal to 360, take away 90. Before his overtime is added in, he makes $270. That's his basic wage. Giving you some time to take that down, and then we're going to move on. I'll just drag that to the side so that we have it as a reference for future questions as needed. Now let's look at question B. Let me erase this. All right, question B says, Mr. Roberts' basic rate of pay. Well, obviously we're working backwards. We know that he worked for 36 hours. We also know that he made a total of $270. So we have to determine for ourselves, how much did he make per hour if he worked for 36 hours and he made $270. So here's how I'm going to calculate that. I am going to do basic rate of pay is equal to 270. Since he made $270 for a basic week, and a basic week consisted of 36 hours, I'm going to do $270 divided by 36. And once I calculate that in my calculator, it's going to give me $7.50. So that tells me that Mr. Roberts is paid $7.50 per hour for a basic work week. And again, I'm going to drag that to the side because that might be or that will be helpful later. So what I did, $270 divided by 36 to get $7.50 per hour. Now, question C says, Mr. Roberts' overtime rates. I need to identify for myself what part of the question speaks to overtime pay. They tell me that overtime pay is paid at time and a half. That right there is the important key, time and a half. And so I'm going to take his basic rate of pay and multiply it by time and a half. Overtime rate is going to be his basic rate, which is $7.50, and we're going to multiply that by 1.5 since they tell me time and a half. Now, had they told me double time, I would multiply by 2. If they told me triple time, I would multiply by 3. So his overtime rates is going to be $11.25. So any hour works overtime he's going to be paid $11.25 per hour. So let's say he works 37 hours. For that additional 1 hour, he's going to get paid $11.25 for the hour. Let me label that as C. And again, I'm going to save that at the side because I know that we're going to need it for later. And this question definitely did increase in intensity because it now required us to take what we knew and work backwards. All right, so now let's look at question D. Question D says to me, the number of overtime hours Mr. Roberts worked. Let's look at what we know. We know that he was paid $90 for his overtime. We also know that he's paid $11.25 per hour. So those two pieces of information are very crucial and essential for me to determine how many hours of overtime he worked. This $90 of overtime earnings is the most important part of the question or the information that was given to us. So let's add in a text box and let's calculate that. Overtime hours worked is going to be equal to $90 divided by 11.20.
Hello, boys and girls. Today, we are going to learn how to add fractions with unlike denominators. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to identify the lowest common denominator, the LCD, and solve addition fractional problems with unlike denominators.
Hello class! Today we're going to learn our multiplication tables.
Oh, that's boring!
Well, wait until you hear this. You've never heard the tables like this before.
10s are 20, 2 11s are 22, and 2 12s are 24.
2 1s are 2, 2 2s are 4, 2 3s are 6, 2 4s are 8, 2 5s are 10, 2 6s are 12, 2 7s are 14, 2 8s are 16, 2 9s are 18, 2 10s are 20, 2 11s are 22, and 2 12s are 24.
3 1s are 3, 3 2s are 6, 3 3s are 9, and 3 4s are 12, 3 5s are 15, 3 6s are 18, 3 7s are 21, and 3 8s are 24, 3 9s are 27, 3 10s are 30, 3 11s are 33, and 3 12s are 36.
3 1s are 3, 3 2s are 6, 3 3s are 9, 3 4s are 12, 3 5s are 15, 3 6s are 18, 3 7s are 21, 3 8s are 24, 3 9s are 27, 3 10s are 30, 3 11s are 33, and 3 12s are 36.
4 1s are 4, 4 2s are 8, 4 3s are 12, and 4 4s are 16, 4 5s are 20, 4 6s are 24, 4 7s are 28, and 4 8s are 32, 4 9s are 36, 4 10s are 40, 4 11s are 44, and 4 12s are 48.
4 1s are 4, 4 2s are 8, 4 3s are 12, 4 4s are 16, 4 5s are 20, 4 6s are 24, 4 7s are 28, 4 8s are 32, 4 9s are 36, 4 10s are 40, 4 11s are 44, and 4 12s are 48. Hey! Hey! Oh yeah, oh yeah! Hey! Hey!
5 1s are 5, 5 2s are 10, 5 3s are 15, and 5 4s are 20, 5 5s are 25, 5 6s are 30, 5 7s are 35, and 5 8s are 40, 5 9s are 45, 5 10s are 50, 5 11s are 55, and 5 12s are 60.
5 1s are 5, 5 2s are 10, 5 3s are 15, 5 4s are 20, 5 5s are 25, 5 6s are 30, 5 7s are 35, 5 8s are 40, 5 9s are 45, 5 10s are 50, 5 11s are 55, and 5 12s are 60.
6 1s are 6, 6 2s are 12, 6 3s are 18, and 6 4s are 24, 6 5s are 30, 6 6s are 36, 6 7s are 42, and 6 8s are 48, 6 9s are 54, 6 10s are 60, 6 11s are 66, and 6 12s are 72.
6 1s are 6, 6 2s are 12, 6 3s are 18, 6 4s are 24, 6 5s are 30, 6 6s are 36, 6 7s are 42, 6 8s are 48, 6 9s are 54, 6 10s are 60, 6 11s are 66, and 6 12s are 72. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
What does the word numerator means? What does the word denominator means? What does the word multiple means? Well, if you had difficulty answering those questions, we are going to explore those 3 words. Can you identify the numbers that make up a fraction? The top number is the numerator, and the bottom number is the denominator. Did you enjoy singing your multiplication tables at the beginning of this lesson? Well, a multiple is the product or answer of a multiplication problem. For example, 3 times 2 is equal to 6. The multiple is 6. Now, can you tell me what is the meaning of numerator, denominator, multiple? Before continuing, press pause so that you can get a pencil and a piece of paper. In the previous lesson, you learned how to add and subtract fractions with like denominators. Let's see what you remembered from those lessons. Solve the problem 2/6 plus 3/6. Because our denominators are alike, we are just going to carry the 6 across the equal sign. Then we are going to add our numerators. 3 plus 2 is equal to 5. So our answer is 5/6. Did you solve your problem the same way? Very good then. Press pause again and solve these two fractional problems with like denominators. Did you get 9/10 for your first answer? Very good. How about 5/8 for your second answer? Again, very good. Now that you have mastered fractions with like denominators, we are now going to learn how to solve fractions with unlike denominators. Are you ready to get started? Example number 1. 1/2 plus 2/3. Now pay attention as we work this problem through. As you can see, the denominators are unlike. They are not the same. Do you have any idea on what we are going to do to make them the same? To make the denominators the same, we have to find the LCD, the lowest common denominator. Do you know how to find the lowest common denominator? To help me find the lowest common denominator, I have created a table to the side. I have the denominator 2 at the top of my first column and the denominator 3 at the top of my second column. Earlier in the lesson, we went over our vocabulary words and one was multiples. Remember, multiple means the product or the answer to a multiplication problem. So we are going to go through our 2 times table and find the multiples for 2. Here are my multiples for 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Now I'm going to find the multiples for 3. Here are my multiples for 3. 3, 6, 9, 12. Take some time. Look at the multiples for 2 and the multiples for 3. Are there any multiples that are common in the 2 column and in the 3 column. Did you say 6 and 12? Well, that is correct. There are 2 sets of multiples that are common. Now, we are looking for the lowest common denominator. So which one would be the lowest? 6 or 12? Yes, 6 is the lowest common denominator. So we are now going to change our denominators to 6. Do you know how we are going to change the denominator 2 and 3 to 6? Let's find out. Whilst getting your multiples, what did you multiply to 2 to get 6? 3. That is correct. Now, in order to change our denominator to equals to 6, we are going to multiply 2 times 3, and then we are going to do the same thing to the numerator 1. Time to change our next fraction. What do you think we are going to multiply to the numerator and denominator of our next fraction? Did you say 2? That is correct. When you wrote the multiples for 3, you said 3 times 2 is equal to 6. So we are going to multiply the denominator by 2. Remember, whatever you do at the bottom of the fraction, you must do to the top of the fraction. So we are also going to multiply the numerator by 2. Let's multiply our fractions out. 1 times 3 equals 3. 2 times 3 equals 6. 2 times 2 equals 4. 3 times 2 equals 6. Very good. Do you need my help from this point on? No, you don't, because you have already mastered solving fractions with like denominators. So go ahead and solve your fraction, and then let's check to see what your answer is. Did you get 7, 6? That is correct. Very good. Now that we are done with example number 1, we will continue with example number 2. Here, you will be asked to do everything before I say anything. Write this fraction on your piece of paper. Make sure to leave space for your working. Draw your LCD table to the side. What are you going to label the columns? 4 and 12. That is correct. You now have your table and it is labeled. What are you going to do next? Find the multiples for 4 and 12? Yes. You can either find 5 for each one or go until you find the lowest common multiple or denominator. Do our multiples match? If not, go back and check your multiples. So, you should have 4, 8, 12 for the multiples for 4, and 12, 24, 36 for the multiples for 12. Circle your lowest common multiple. Did you circle 12 as your lowest common denominator? That is correct. Based on your LCD table, go ahead and write in, smaller than the numbers that you already have, what you will multiply to your first fraction, 2 over 12. Did you write times 1 for 12 and times 1 for 2? That is correct. Go ahead and do the same thing for your next fraction, 2 over 4. Are you multiplying by 3? That is correct. 4 times 3 and 2 times 3. You have done such a wonderful job working thus far. Now, multiply your fractions out. 2 times 1 equals 12 times 1 equals 2 times 3 equals 4 times 3 equals. Solve the fraction 212 plus 612. Did you get 812? Very, very, very good. It's now time for you to practice on your own. Remember, practice makes perfect. We will check the answers to the problems that you solved today, tomorrow before we begin our lesson. Boys and girls, you have done an excellent job today. See you tomorrow when we will learn how to subtract fractions with unlike denominators. Bye.
I kind of like this virtual learning thing.